Baby, baby.
Hello, listeners. It's your boy NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka Horse Choker. That's a Boondocks reference. Look it up if you're not sure what it means. Hello, all. Welcome back to the podcast that I sometimes do whenever I have a chance or whenever I feel like it to talk about whatever I feel like whenever I feel like it. Shout out to anybody listening to my last episode, which was literally just me ranting on some stuff, but I appreciate it. I appreciate people who are still out there listening. I am one, but many podcasts that exist in the world. So if you're choosing to listen to this and you enjoy it, thank you. I consider it an honor. There's a lot better stuff out there than me, honestly, so the fact that you're listening, I really do appreciate. But anyway, it's a beautiful day. It's a Sunday. Got the windows open, my cat's looking outside, enjoying it. And I was just watching an interesting video from a YouTube channel called Legal Eagle about the charges against former President Trump in regards to trying to steal the 2020 presidential election. Now, I will put these videos in the description for you to watch, and before you listen, I highly recommend that you watch them. Because if you haven't really gone into detail about the charges against the former president in regards to the 2020 election, I highly recommend that you do so. It is a truly remarkably groundbreaking situation that we find ourselves in here. And obviously the word unprecedented has been abused during the Trump years because it's frankly everything's been unprecedented. It's almost like America elected someone who has no real moral compass or any ability to connect with others in any way besides whatever he wants for himself. As the leader of the free world, may have not turned out to have been such a great plan. But you know what? Democracy works that way sometimes. People make choices, and sometimes the choices they make don't work out. But hey, what happened is that he had 4 years to run. A lot of stuff happened, some good, mostly bad. And then Joe Biden won the 2020 election. The votes were counted, all fair and square, and he won. Now, the reason that we're in the position we're in today is because otherwise rational adults who should know better, and here's a quick little thought experiment for you. If it was 2015 and you saw a Terminator-style time travel experience with the lightning and the electricity and all the other stuff, and you saw someone come back from the year 2023, and they were to tell you about what happened if Trump becomes president and the resulting aftermath, honestly, no one would be shocked. The fact that no one would be shocked in 2015 that this information is true, but currently a large portion of the country refuses to accept it as actual reality, tells us a lot about ourselves and why we find ourselves in the current situation. I've been thinking a lot about what to call this one. Well, it was going to be directly related about Donald Trump and the election, but I think there's a larger theme here. And there's three things I kind of want to point out and use this particular situation to examine as to why I think a large portion of the country still stands behind a man who is clearly unfit for office and does belong behind a prison cell. There's three things I want you to think about and remember here. And you can use it with the acronym TAT, TAT. Trust, authority, and timing. What do these three things have to do with each other? We'll get into it. Let's start off with the basic one. Truth. Easy, right? What is truth? Or what is the truth? What is the truth as you see it? What is the truth as the law says it is? What is the truth to science? What is the truth to people? You keep saying the word truth over and over again. It's one of those situations where the word starts to no longer sound right or make sense. But let's not abuse it. Let's just do the really basic thing, right? What is the truth? I'm looking at my cat right now. If I tell you my cat's a mammal, that's a fact. That's the truth. The cat is a species of animal that we classify as a mammal. prove she's a mammal. She's got lungs. She breathes air. She's a mammal. Look at her right now. She's adorable. That's the truth, right? The truth is that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. More people voted for Joe Biden, and the means in which the election was conducted during a, let's remember, pandemic in which hundreds of thousands of people were dying all over the country and we had no real control or vaccine yet, we had to take all sorts of precautions. Honestly, things that should have been done years ago, like expansions of mail-in voting and expansions of timelines for people to vote. Because, hey, a lot of people in this country work during the day. And so having everybody have to wait until the last Tuesday in November from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. is honestly not the best way to do it. Now, there's a reason many in my party want it to be that way. It's because they believe that that's the only way that they'll ever really win, and that's the only real fair way to conduct an election. But, you know, they're wrong, but we'll move on. Truth is what we all have to know and believe. And of course, there are certain things that people will argue are not the truth, and some people are doing that because they're lying, they don't understand, they don't have the correct information, or it may be an incomplete thought process. But you know, if you're listening to this, you probably have a good sense of what the truth is. Now, for many people, I think they have to have the idea that the truth and their own personal worldview must always correlate. And that's because they're under the assumption that if they're wrong about one thing, that a thread will unravel and they have to question their entire worldview. And you know, that's a really challenging thing for a lot of people. Particularly over the last few years, as many people as I've known who believed a certain way about the world and their religion and how they think about people has been completely upended by, let's be honest, people being people. Another fun truth is that we all know about water, and for some of you this may be throwing all the way back to an elementary school science lesson, but what does water generally do? Water follows the path of least resistance. You know what human beings are mostly made up of? Again, science fact from when you were in elementary school. Water. The surprise that people made up of mostly water do what water does and follow the path of least resistance? Not at all. Not at all. For many people, it's just easier. Our brains put a lot of stuff on autopilot for us, because if we had to consciously think about, you know, half of what is automatically put in there, I don't think any person could survive or live through it. Sometimes you have something called a personal truth, which is something that, you know, may be an opinion, but to you it is the reality. For example, my cat is currently playing inside of a box I'm planning to recycle. To me, it is adorable, and that is the truth. And there are many people out there who like cats and don't like cats who would agree that with the statement that watching this cat play in this box is adorable. Whether they know what any of those words mean, if they want a context or debate something specific, you know, let's not make it too complicated here. It's a cat playing in a box. It's cute, right? It may not be a fact in a literal scientific legal sense, but as a general consensus it is. So with truth, we kind of have, you know, what is a real concrete thing that has been observed and cataloged and basically agreed upon. And then we have sort of less than facts, but more so generalized accepted statements of accuracy, where when we go about our day and just sort of say things are what they are, we kind of take people at their word. Because to not do so would require us to live in a state of paranoia that is far too much for any person to really live with. To bring this back to the more concrete story at hand, the truth about the 2020 election is that during a pandemic year, many states took very reasonable steps to expand access for voting. And frankly, that's a good thing. We should want as many eligible people to vote as possible. More people voting is a good thing. Many people may not actually believe that because they believe that they shouldn't trust people as a whole, but the whole point of the American experiment is a constant expansion of the franchise to people who previously did not have it. Obviously, when this country was founded, it was limited, but now we pretty much let everybody vote, and that's a good thing. People who are obviously over the age of 18 U.S. citizens. Obviously, the felony thing in many states is a big deal. I personally don't think anybody who has served their time should be prevented from voting. Not really big on the voting in prison. Just a personal thought there, but that's just me. When we think about the 2020 year, and obviously it's a crazy year, but I think a lot of people really seem to underestimate the seriousness of which these charges have brought to light. The risk that we had of a coup in the United States of America. Now, I'm sure the word coup is going to be debated by the MAGA people who refuse to say that that's what Donald Trump did, but that's what he did. When they think of coup, they may think of the military storming into Congress and forcing them to vote for Donald Trump to be president. But if you think about it, is that not what Donald Trump wanted? Did Donald Trump not want a large showing of force to force people to vote the way he wanted them to, for him to illegally stay in power? You know, people talk about third world, banana republic type stuff when it comes to these charges, but what Donald Trump attempted to do in 2020 is, in fact, an example of a third world, banana republic type of situation, where a bunch of otherwise serious people, quote unquote, construct some fake legal rationale to steal power from a person who was legitimately elected. It's a real scary thing. And then every day I work with and talk to people on the conservative Republican side of the aisle, and I listen to what they listen to, and believe me, they do not believe these charges are real. In fact, many of them don't even read the indictment. Many can't. But the fact is that what they're waiting for is people that they trust to tell them that the indictment is bullshit. And they listen to, fake lawyers, or lawyers who are, saying something that's not necessarily accurate, but gets the point across that they want to. Often cited is someone named Jonathan Turley, who I don't know why he is. He seems to be wrong about everything. But he's often quoted as saying this indictment is about the First Amendment, which it is not. And you see many of the same people who want to censor books at school claim this is a First Amendment issue, but I digress. That's cognitive dissonance, and I've been over that more than once. People really need to understand that this is a serious crime. And we've had, in this country, let's face it, we've been rather, I don't say the word lucky, but we are lucky in that we really haven't had a candidate like Trump before who was so willing to bend the rules to benefit himself at the expense of the American people. It's never happened before. And we've always had a peaceful transition of power, except for the last presidential election. And it's no coincidence that Donald Trump is at the center of that. It's no coincidence a man that has always encouraged violence among his followers had violence happen on the day that Congress certified his loss. You hear it from the people who were there. Sure, when they go to court and they claim ignorance and sadness, they say they were duped, but when they're there, it's all on video. They're there to stop it. They're there to fight for Trump. They're there to save America from the communists and the pedophiles and the Democrats, which them, I guess, are all the same thing. Many people who are either brain broken or brainwashed or partisan or whatever, right? Anybody who went to the Capitol that day has no sympathy for me at all. And I've been on record, and I still stand by that every single person who was there, who trespassed into the building that day, deserves the maximum punishment allowable under law. And the fact that nearly 1,000 people have been convicted, there's 1,000 more on the way, we've had people charged and convicted of seditious conspiracy. I don't need to listen to anybody else to tell me this was all fake. The Julie Kellys and Newsmax and OANs of the world are obviously either insane or liars or both, pandering to people who will give them money to say what they want to say. You know what? Grifter's gonna grift. We deal with Dan Proft all the time. I know what grifters are. I sit here making an honest living, doing this podcast for free, of which I have received no money to do. Listeners, feel free to donate to support the podcast. All I'm saying is that integrity comes with a price. You can make a lot of money if you give up your integrity and your shame and you're willing to lie, especially for powerful people who are trying to do nefarious things like, I don't know, stay in power beyond when they're legally allowed to do so through illegal means. Now, this is a good spot to go into my next spot, which is authority. What is authority? Is it the same thing as truth? Not always. And this is an important distinction here. Truth does not equal authority, and authority does not equal truth. What do I mean by authority? You could say the definite dictionary definition, but I don't think it's relevant. To me, authority means the ability to influence or control others and the decisions that they make. Authority would be, a local politician has authority to do what they are elected to do in the office that they're in. Authority is what cops have when they use their powers to try to detain people who they believe are violating the law. Authority is what voters give when they vote for people to be in charge of certain offices or policies or ballot initiatives or whatever. Voting is a form of authority. I am voting to support this. I am making an autonomous decision to support someone or something that will affect others. Authority is the real electors that were certified on December 14th of 2020. Those were done by people with proper authorization, credentials. They were on ballots. They were elected. They went through Secretary of the State offices. Their names were on paperwork. They were voted on in the state capitals. Those are the real electors who went to cast their votes in favor of the candidate in that state. December 14th was initially part of the Trump campaign's plan to stop this, but they couldn't. But what they did was have other people who weren't the real electors go to, Denny's or Republican Party headquarters, or in some cases attempt to sneak in overnight at capitals to come in and vote. And as it seems clear from the indictments that have been laid out by people, many of them were duped into believing this was a backup plan for the Trump campaign in the event that their legal challenges prevailed. But no, as a matter of fact, the fake electors themselves are the plan. The fake electors do not have the authority to vote on who the next president is. They're not real. Even if they sat in a circle and put it on official paperwork and mailed it to the National Archives and Congress, that doesn't mean it's real. And the Trump campaign knew it wasn't real. But they acted like it was real on the basis that if there was two sets of electors, that the states couldn't vote on those, then that state would just basically have its votes tossed out. The point of doing this in enough states so that the entire election gets thrown into question was that so that they could have the House of Representatives vote on the president. And, if you want to see like a real-life example, not a real-life example, but if you want to see a theatrical example of this, I would take you to one of the last seasons of the hit Netflix show House of Cards, which was also a British show before that, but I'm talking about the American version. I know, Kevin Spacey, just get over it. Deal with it. He's in the show. He's the character. The point being is that he eventually becomes the President of the United States through, let's face it, subterfuge. And spoiler alert for this, but basically he steals the election from the other person who legitimately won. Now, the way in which it's done in that show is a little far-fetched in my opinion, but the way that the Trump administration tried to do this is the real-life version of this. Pretty simple is that if you basically throw enough confusion in place where that the states don't have the ability to certify their electors, which is, by the way, not what happened. All the states certified their electors, and what they were trying to do was have Congress say that, no, those aren't real. We got these other random-ass people from Denny's to say there, and we don't know which one's which, so we'll just have to have the House of Representatives vote on it. And in House of Cards, it basically goes where, every delegation gets one vote, so if there's 50 states, and 26 of them are represented by Republicans, and 24 are represented by Democrats, then the 26 Republicans will pick the president, and they're going to all obviously vote for Trump. And then same thing in the Senate, but it's the vice president. And then that is where they have a very different ending in the House of Cards scenario. But the point being is that that's what the case was, right? When everything else failed, what the Trump administration and his affiliates through the campaign tried to do was use quote-unquote authority to say that there were irregularities in the election. They were using the positions of power to say that it's coming from me, therefore it's the truth. And that is the important distinction here, is that authority should be backed by truth, but is not necessarily required. We're well aware that people in positions of authority lie and spread misinformation and cheat and do all sorts of stuff. In fact, that's how often many of them seem to get there in the first place. We would hope that people in positions of authority would listen to and accept the truth, but as we all know, that is not often the case. I will say that many people do. Across America, there are thousands of elected people, right? Everything from trustees to supervisors, all the way up to, your congressmen and senators. And for the vast majority of them, they're good people who work very hard and want to be interested in public service. And of course, there's always going to be people who are there to just make a name for themselves. We all know who they are. It happens at the local level too, but I do feel like most people get involved because they care, they want to make a difference. Not in the case of the Trump campaign. This was not an attempt to be honest and try to protect American democracy from a vote. These people knew that they were going to lose, right? Months in advance. The polling was very clear that Joe Biden was going to win. Most people who knew Joe Biden was going to win were saying so, and while the Trump campaign was putting on a brave face, I believe many of them knew that it was over. And of course, when they called Arizona on election night, that's when we all knew it was just going to go downhill from there. And that's frankly where the whole mess started, is they had just let it go. If Donald Trump had just said I lost, none of this would be here. We would not be in the position we're in today if Donald Trump just admitted that, hey, you know what, he lost fair and square and it's over. These people who say they don't question the election, they wouldn't question it at all, because they've ceded their version of truth to an authority. That authority being Donald Trump. And if the authority that they trust says something's up here, they're also going to say something's up here. Whether they actually believe it, or it's in a partisan interest to do so, or a contrarian interest, or they just really don't know. I don't know how many people really don't know at this point, but considering the fact that how closed off an information loop can be in the internet age, how you can basically have access to every source in the world and have an algorithm curate exactly what you want all the time, of course some people will live in bubbles. I try to pierce bubbles from time to time to get different perspectives, and often I have to go into the quote-unquote conservative media ecosystem, whether it's my local talk radio or Dan Bongino or some other dumbass that's on there saying some dumbass stuff, Charlie Kirk. The point being is that there are lots of people who listen to this, people with money and position of power, influence, and frankly, I need to know where they're coming from if I'm going to have a discussion with them about anything. And guess what? If they're going to be out there saying Charlie Kirk said blah, 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 and you're like, who the hell is Charlie Kirk? I'll be like, I know Charlie Kirk. Motherfucker couldn't graduate college. He can't even hang out with people his own age. He has to hang around old men and grift them for money to have purpose. Turning Point USA is a joke, but whatever. The point is that when it comes to authority, people will often cede what they concede the truth to be to those that have authority, because they believe that authority must correlate with truth, which is not always true. But for those people in the authority that do appreciate truth and go with it, that is where the magic happens. That is where good people come together and work hard and make decisions that benefit the community and the people in it. That's the best of what America has to offer. I'm not talking about that in this particular case, but just be aware that I feel like the vast majority of the country is like that. We get inundated with bad news all the time because that's the way we live now. I saw something somewhere that we're exposed to more traumatic events now than like anyone in the 1700s would ever know. And it's like, of course, in the 1700s, you might know like 4 people who've ever died. because you live in a town of 50 people and will never leave. In this modern day and age, in which, if you think about it, would blow the mind of anybody who lived in the 1700s, that we have access to all the information ever made, everything in real time, all accessible right now, even stuff that isn't real, their brains would explode. They probably couldn't even process that. And let's be honest, the human brain is not so terribly evolved from 1700 as it is now in 2023, but the world around us has. And while we continue to adapt, we still have these relatively basic primal instincts in us. One of those is to find a strong man of authority to protect us from the dangers of the world. And at a very basic core level, that is how many people see Donald Trump. They see him, in my opinion wrongly, as a protector and a fighter and a true American, from an America they don't recognize. And that leads me to my next and final point. Timing. You know what they say. Timing is everything. Timing matters a lot. For both truth and authority. If anything, it matters almost more than those two concepts itself. And let me explain what I mean by that. We all know what timing is, right? It's very important in comedy. It's very important that you show up on time for work. It's very important you get enough sleep, and you sleep at times that work for you. It's important to know what time your favorite show's on. That's a literal time thing, but timing itself is when things come, and is the world ready at that moment for that thing. When things are considered, quote, ahead of their time, products, shows, people, thoughts, ideas, what they mean is that it's simply a matter of timing. What is considered fringe and radical 100 years ago may be considered standard truth today. Or what is considered truth and factual 100 years ago may be considered completely ludicrous and not based in reality today. It's a matter of when things come that happen. Obviously, timing is everything, and there's a reason that sentence matters. And the timing in this situation is incredibly important. There was a time in America where something like Donald Trump's coup attempt probably had a more realistic chance of happening. It was probably way earlier in our history. Obviously, if you look up the elections of 1876, that was a whole thing that I'm assuming the Trump campaign wanted to try to make this into, or even 2000. Yeah, something that's more recent and in our lifetimes that we've all seen, which the election hung on one state and the counting procedures of that one state, as opposed to 2020. But look at 2020 in context, right? In 2020, there's a pandemic happening. People are spreading information like nobody's business all over the place. A lot of it true, a lot of it not. And when you have people in positions of authority, like Trump, who people have cited their version of truth over, I tried to cut the recording, but if you hear a car horn in there, my bad. The point of timing is when the Trump campaign pressured Congress to do this, using a compressed time frame, such as the period between, let's be honest, the last part of an election, which is the final Tuesday, which is that first Tuesday in November, where the final votes are counted, right? As if people have already mailed in ballots, they might still be in the mail, there's a process time to count them, but at that point at 7 p.m., right, that's it. That's over. We're at the counting point, and then they count. From there on, it is a very compressed time frame to review things, because the new president is sworn in January 20th, and in that time, especially if it's, 2 elections and you've had the same people in there for a long time, it takes a bit to transition. It's a whole process. Donald Trump knew that this compressed time frame would mean that there would be not a lot of time to debate things. And as a matter of fact, these allegations prove the campaign was counting on this, assuming that it falls under the political sphere, or there's not enough time to review, and that they could use the compressed timeline to force a vote in Congress to the aforementioned 26 votes for Donald Trump for president. And let's be clear, right? Donald Trump has never really won a majority of anything. He got the delegates in the primary election in 2016, and he won the electoral votes in the general election, but both of which he never received the popular vote. And of course, the 2020 primary wasn't a primary. They didn't even try to act like there was a primary, even though some of us did. And we tried our best to do anything to have any sort of competition, but obviously the party was solidly behind Trump at that point. And even now, when he's no longer the official nominee, his people are still there. They're still in the same positions. Many of them have been forced out because they chose truth over authority and therefore have lost where they're at. And, this is a quick side note here. If you hear cars out there, I'm sorry. My windows are open and people are driving by. I can only do so much. But this is a quick tangent. The Republican Party has lost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of voters since 2016. Either from people switching, from people dying, and people just no longer voting. And this is the problem, is that a lot of Trump voters are not what you would call consistent voters. As in, people who vote for, off-year elections and midterms, both in primaries and in generals. The amount of people that actually do all of that, and even go beyond that in terms of, the ballot process, is very, very small compared to the general population. The fact of the matter is that the current electorate in the Republican primary still favors Donald Trump. And part of that is because the electorate has shifted from an anti-Trump one to a pro-Trump one. One by virtue of Trump winning and thus assuming the truth and authority mantles that I talked about earlier. And also because a lot of people are partisans and they just are contrarians and they say, you know what, I'm going to defend him even harder when I hear the Democrats point out something true about him because I have to stand up for the team. That's one of those basic primal instincts we have. Defend the team or the tribe, right? They're my group, they're my people. We need social connections to survive in a real way. So if someone comes after that, I have to defend them. Granted, we no longer live in tribes that war over pieces of land. We live in a more complex society. But again, the human brain continues to catch up with where we're at. So for many people, everything about 2020 fed into a conspiracy narrative. The way that certain election procedures were done, the way that money was dispersed. And to them, it all just proves that something was fishy about it. As opposed to the large, multifaceted, complex, yet somehow still pulled it off relatively well in the most secure election ever, and that's from Trump's own government. Look it up. By the way, he fired that guy, which should tell you something. Again, if authority hears truth and rejects it, that is authority's problem. It doesn't mean that truth isn't real. It means that authority no longer wants to hear it. And obviously, when authority no longer wants to hear truth, especially real obvious truths, we got some serious problems. I honestly believe this election, the ability for misinformation to spread is faster than it's ever been before, but also the ability to counter it is there. And what we're lucky is that even with all of that being true, this time in America, the voting population has now changed where that it is younger, more educated, more female, more suburban and urban. And you know what that means? It means cities and college towns and suburbs everywhere. Some of these places, reliably Republican districts, are now voting blue. They're voting Democratic. They may consider themselves independents in some cases, but they're basically stuck between the Democrat and an insane person the Republican Party was forced to put up because the primary voters wanted that, or the Trump people in charge of the party picked that. And you know what happens? They lose. They lose elections. In a normal world, what happens is when you lose, you regroup, you focus, you clear out the bad, you focus on the good things, and you try to expand from there. But in the Republican Party, currently the opposite is happening. They're doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on things because they believe they have to, or they want to, or it's in their partisan or financial interest or whatever, and there's not enough people around to stop them. And in this day and age, in a time which people continue to, in many cases, isolate themselves from information they don't want to hear, they want authority without truth, and they're willing to basically throw out all the old rules to stop people they don't want from achieving power. What you have a situation in this country is where the timing of the, in my opinion, the male Anglo-Saxon Christian conservative domination of this country is essentially over. Now, granted, you want to talk about census statistics and race and whatnot, there's a whole conversation too there. But what I mean is that, between the millennials and Generation Z, we're the most diverse sets of generations ever, with access to all the communications and information anybody could ever really want. And now as we continue to grow up, get older, get jobs, get elected, be involved in government, and grow, and become a more diverse, complex, multiracial, democratic society, again, one of the only real examples in world history that's ever happened right here in this country. And believe me, it wasn't that easy. We didn't start off that way. People had to fight and claw their way to it. But to get to this point now in world history, this time, which, let's be honest, as I've said before, despite all the problems, is the greatest time in human history to be alive, means that our timing worked out pretty well. We now live in an era where people, despite the ability to grift and lie and isolate themselves off, they can't just control the entire narrative anymore. And there may have been a day and time when Donald Trump's plan would have worked and we would have still had him in office to this day. And also, again, quick side note, in the indictment it's pointing out that if he did that and there were riots, they were more than happy to try to use the military to quell it. So they were, again, counting on force as an option. Even though they know, it's ridiculous, to be honest. Donald Trump is guilty. I mean, legally, I have to say he's innocent until proven guilty, and he's denying all the charges and blah, 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 blah. But let's be clear. We all saw it, what happened. We all saw it, and there's more stuff being exposed every day. And the longer this goes on, the Republican Party continues to find itself in a worse spot. Not growing, shrinking, losing money, having fist fights in their offices, being at the whims of the craziest people imaginable, because in the previous ecosystem, being praising of Trump equaled forward advancement, which means that for 4 years, Trump skeptics were pushed out, Trump lackeys were put in, who, by the way, are in many cases incompetent and stupid and couldn't run a campaign if their lives actually depended on it, despite being given millions of dollars to do so. It's all just a grift for them. They grift their way through it, make money, make all these bold claims, and blame everyone else when they lose. There's a time for that. And granted, there's always been a time for grifters, but in this particular day and age, there is an opportunity for people like the Charlie Kirks and the Dan Profts of the world to grift their way to fame and fortune off the backs of other people. But in terms of achieving the other two things I mentioned, truth and authority, they've clearly abandoned the truth in favor of authority. And what happens is that the majority of people want the truth. And they want people who know the truth and agree with that truth to be in authority. And there are many cases in which timing affects whether or not those people can in fact get into office or whether they lose to demagogues. But in this day and age, in America in 2023, there's never been a better time to get involved and run for office. Because in many cases, you may be up against a completely insane, incompetent person who may only be there because they had no real opposition, or a machine put them in. Another quick side note about timing. Ron DeSantis wanted to run for president in 2024. What a fool. What an actual fucking fool. If that man had just done what he done in Florida, keep his culture war bullshit up, right? Leave office, take a tour, come back and challenge not Biden in 2028, he probably would have had a real chance, but no. I'm sure he got convinced by people that this was the moment and he could be Donald Trump without the baggage, except that's the thing, nobody wants Donald Trump without the baggage. They want Trump and the baggage. They want all of it. That's the whole point. They haven't ceded authority to the Republican Party, in truth. They ceded it to a particular man. DeSantis can act like him all he wants and read his books to his kids, but no one's going to believe you. No one's going to want that. Everyone knows you're not Trump. Terrible timing. Terrible timing, Ron. You had a rise, which, to be clear, is Trump's responsibility. He put you where you are. And you could have been more strategic about it, but you decided you had to plow right ahead and spend millions of dollars with your consultants and hire a bunch of fucking Nazis on your campaign. How's that working out for you, Ron? You can try to beat up on immigrants and everybody you want in Florida all you want, but everyone knows you're just a weak man on the inside. The fact is that a man that's facing like 600 years in prison is 30 points ahead of you when you should be winning in a normal world. To tell you a little bit about yourself, but also about the primary that you're running in and the voters you're trying to attract. Truth, authority, and timing. In politics, these three things should coincide in a way that hopefully works out for most of us. Next year, we will not only have a presidential election, but Donald Trump will be facing probably 4 separate criminal trials all the same, all within months of each other. And I'm going to give you 2 timelines. One that we won't hope is the truth, one that is more likely the truth. Timeline number 1 is that through a series of criminal trials and likely convictions, people in the Republican Party realize that this is no longer feasible. Donald Trump is now a convicted felon and can't even vote for himself in probably several states. Probably can't even run for office in several states, but that's, whatever here or there. And that they will coalesce around somebody else, and whether that has to go to a brokered convention in Milwaukee or whatever, some situation will occur in which Donald Trump is not the nominee. It would be by, let's face it, real brute force and probably barely over the finish line. It would not be a mass rejection of Trump, but a kind of like what Trump did in 2016, more of a plurality against him, or one person that's against him just gets enough of it between him and the Trump wannabes to actually win the nomination. And frankly, in that case, if that person is for any reason somehow miraculously able to get there, despite a divided party, has to go up against Joe Biden, who has an impressive record, millions of dollars, and is the current president of the United States. And despite what you hear about Democrats complaining about his age, guess what? Everyone's falling in line as soon as the votes start rolling in. 100%. They've gotten everything they wanted to Joe Biden. The man is frankly crushing it, objectively speaking. And I'm saying this as a Republican. I did vote for him, but not everything he's done I've been a fan of. But let's face it, for the most part, America's back under Joe Biden. The guy that we all thought was a joke in the Obama years turned out to be the hero we needed. And while he did not run in 2016, he might not have won in 2016, but he ran in 2020. And you know what's really easy to do? It's very easy to look good when the person behind you or in front of you is terrible. You know why they say you should go first when you give speeches? Because you got no one to compare yourself to. And usually, we've all seen people go first, and frankly, I might be a little biased from my academic record here with academic people who were competitive and wanted to go first, but generally if people go first, the first people to speak don't do a great job. And to follow up after that is much easier. Donald Trump, let's face it, is the worst president this country's ever had. Objectively speaking. The worst. And you could say, Steve, but what about James Polk and blah, 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 blah. By the way, the other day I said that I said the 14th president was Zachary Taylor, and I was mostly joking, but I hope the people who heard me say that didn't take it seriously. The 14th president was not Zachary Taylor. Totally ran him aside there. But Donald Trump is the worst president this country's ever had, both in terms of his approval rating and his electoral success, and I feel like I have to mention this again, he attempted a coup against our government. So basically by default, he's the worst president ever. Joe Biden now gets to basically run against him again. So it's like, hey folks, this, the dude that's clearly unfit to even run a Denny's slash now likely convicted felon at that point, compared to me, Joe Biden, Uncle Joe. You know I'm old, you may not like it, but hey, the other alternative is literally the worst thing imaginable. Of course they're going to vote for Joe Biden. Honestly, with the growth of the Democratic voter base and the shrinking of the Republican voter base, I wouldn't be surprised if some states that have been relatively close but red in the last few years switch. I don't want to make too bold a prediction, but since Joe Biden was able to flip both Arizona and Georgia, and that's likely not going to change in 2024, and what's more likely to me than not is that another red state that previously voted Republican consistently but has had a large, growing population theoretically votes not in their own state, like for the governor and those places too, the Democratic candidates, but enough of them vote so that statewide a Democratic senator or hell, the president Joe Biden could win. And my thoughts in this case is, and now you're probably not going to believe me. At this point, I'm going to say that this is a bit of a stretch, but hear me out on this one. Theoretically, Texas could go for Joe Biden in 2024. And I say that because, again, hear me out. If you look at the last several elections, while the Democratic Party does not have a majority, they can get enough votes to get pretty close. See Ted Cruz in 2018. But if in the next few years, again, Texas continues to do asshole things like Greg Abbott does, Trump continues to rack up indictments and or convictions, and the Republican Party refuses to change, that takes us into, let's face it, timeline number 2, which is where this is most likely going to go. Donald Trump will continue to receive the vast majority of the support of the party, if not more, after he is criminally convicted. It will be denied. It will say it's a gross exaggeration of the law. America's lost the Constitution. It's all thrown out. Blah, blah, blah. The same old people who've been saying the same old things since 2016 are saying the same old bullshit things again. Right? They already believe America's lost because minorities can vote and live their own lives now. And for them, that's a problem. Whatever. They're going to support him. He's going to get blown out. It will not be as close as it was in 2020. Partisanship aside, I don't mean that as there's always been the assumption that, and I believe a lot of conservatives do this to overstate their support. They don't want to say that, they used to say that they were the silent majority, and many still do, but often they say that this country's split 50-50, right? It's right down the middle, we're half, they're half. We need to convince 1%, 2%, 5%, whatever it is, just enough to get over the finish line. And it's no. You're not actually at 50%. Honestly, in my mind, this is more like a 57-43 country. To give you an example, I would say 57% of the country would vote for Biden, and 43% would vote for Trump. Now, out of 100, 57 is a clear winner, right? And that's what a lot of, I think, my conservative Republican colleagues don't understand, is that you're not the majority, and you're not even 50-50. You're at 45 and below, which means that there's a significant chunk of you, which, yes, can win a plurality contest in a Republican primary, Trump, but when it comes to winning literally anything else, since we don't live in a multi-party system, since we live for the most part in most states, first past the post election, if you're already down by that much, you're not going to win. And unless you convince a lot of people, again, if it's a 57-43, you need to convince 8% of the country, or 8% of the electorate to change their votes. You're not going to do it by doubling and tripling down on the same people whose votes you already had locked in 2 years before you started running. And unfortunately, the circumstances are the case now where the Republican Party is, the more pro-Trump you are, the better you do in the party, but you do worse everywhere else. So in areas where they're already winning and locked in, that's where you get crazy things happening. In areas where they had close 50-50, slightly less than 50 shots, they just get blown out of the water. Look at Michigan. Republicans had control of that whole state at one point. Now they got like 50 grand in the bank account and they're having fist fights in their office. Also, I'm pretty sure several of their elected heads are been indicted for crimes or have been convicted of crimes. Or just say straight up crazy nonsense. You see it happening everywhere. People who are competent campaigners, and people who understood things, who read things they disagree with, and knew how to connect with people they don't, have been replaced by those who live in circular movements. They live in silos of information. They get what they want when they want. And unfortunately, while it works for them, the vast majority of the country does not feel that way. The vast majority of this country, its truth, its authority, and its timing is within the 57% of the country that thinks the same way. That's generally, we'll say, pro-Obama, pro-Biden, anti-Trump. That electorate's not going to change anytime soon. And as the Republican Party continues to not adapt and not understand that authority does not equal truth, that truth gets you authority, and that with good timing, you can get to the places you want to go, they are unfortunately stuck in this doom loop where Trump is the end-all be-all and we must defend him at all costs. And we're past several breaking points now. 18, 20, 22. There's been plenty of moments to dump this dude and get over it, but unfortunately it's just enough people keep sticking with it, and it's just very frustrating. Because we're at an impasse in which Trumpers and MAGA people are the majority of the party, but a significant portion of us are not. And while we can't win our own party, we can get the Democrats to win every time if we vote for them. Which is what we're going to keep doing, because we're not going to vote for insane criminals. Because we don't live in a partisan, crazy mindset where if they say it's good, it must actually be bad. And if they say it's bad, we must say it's good. That's some stupid ass shit to think. And as long as that's the case, as long as you ignore truth, focus on authority, and don't understand timing, you will never win elections ever again. And you will deserve it. Because you will have ignored the three basic principles that make anything work. To make governance work, to make accountability work, to make anything work, you have to have truth, and you have to take that with authority. And you have to have the right timing to do it. And frankly, the Republican Party and Trump has failed all three of those tests. It's going to be another long slog of bullshit accusations, trying to make anything up about Joe Biden you can to make him look bad, while Donald Trump continues to rack up actual crimes against him. And the longer you deflect it or try to make it go away, no one will take you seriously, and you will lose. I'm not even going to go to the Lincoln Day dinner this year. Joni Ernst is coming to the Northwest Suburban Lincoln Day dinner, and in response to the allegations, she calls them partisan, made-up bullshit. Well, you know what, Joni? Go back to Iowa. It's amazing how Donald Trump can insult your own governor, and you won't even say the man shouldn't be in office again with obvious criminal charges against him, because again, they're politicians. Politicians respond to what the voters want, and currently, their voters want Trump. There is no incentive and no large enough group to stop that, so they have to keep saying it. And until Trump is either incarcerated or dies, there's frankly no other way around this. But there is. You could all just decide, collectively, to stop. To say that, you know what, the man's going to go to prison, or be at the very least be convicted of multiple felonies that are very bad, treasonous bad, so why don't we just go ahead and just fucking stop this? Just stop it. You know what? You want to acknowledge it never happened, you want to just get past it, you want to say, very basically, mistakes were made, whatever. Literally pick a different person that is not Donald Trump. You want to go with shitty Trump DeSantis, or Haley, or whatever other bullshit you want? Go for it. But at least it's not Donald Trump. It's not a man facing 600 years in prison in multiple dozen serious felonies. Like, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here saying this out loud. If this was 2015, this would be a no-brainer. But in 2023, between partisanship and stupidity, otherwise educated people I know are telling me with a straight face that no, Donald Trump can win even more in 2024. No! I'm done trying to understand your line of thinking. That's right. You hear my cat in there. I'm about at the end here, so I'm not even going to bother to stop. If you don't understand that you're going to lose, and the most people don't like it, and you can't convince them otherwise, and frankly, you deserve it. You deserve to lose because you can't learn anything. If you can't learn the truth, you won't be able to use it. And if you can't get in a position of authority, you can't act on truth. If you don't have good timing, you can't do any of it. I needed that. I needed to get that out. But, again, in my closing minutes here, I want to thank anybody who's still listening to this point. Honestly, most of these podcasts are me just expressing my thoughts out loud. And I don't have many public forums to do it, and it's nice to just have a place where, again, anyone in the world can just pull up NotoriousSA and hear what I have to say. Obviously, I'm on all the socials. I don't post on them all the time, but I still get them, so if you email me, you send anything, tweet something, retweet something, repost something on X. Don't even get me started on the Twitter situation. You know, I'm always around. And of course, obviously, you can always financially support the podcast, which would be super helpful. And no one's done, I expect no one to, but hey, you want to throw me $10, I'm down for it, right? I hope all of you out there have just the best lives and are having a great day today. And please, if you're civically active, if you're a Democrat, you know, things are going well for you. I don't have to tell you anything, obviously. But if you're a Republican, look, man, things are not going well, okay? The heydays of the 2010s are over. It's the 2020s now. The world's changed. You're no longer a majority of voters pretty much anywhere. And until you realize that and get people who you did not want or care about before to acknowledge that not only that they exist and that they have needs, but you're willing to act on them, you're willing to act on their truths when you're in a position of authority, then guess what? You're never going to have authority. And maybe that leads to a cycle where you believe stuff that isn't true and you keep doing bad things and have bad timing, but you know, whatever. Whatever, I guess, right? Let someone else govern. Let the adults handle it while you guys go to your conventions and spew your nonsense and grift each other and sell each other t-shirts and steal money, and eventually Donald Trump will disappear one way or the other, and we're gonna have to live with the consequences of it. And until then, my fellow Republicans, enjoy losing. To paraphrase Donald Trump, we're gonna get so tired of losing. But you don't get tired of it. You love it. Because in a way, losing is winning. Because by them winning, for many people, it's a perverse thing where it's like, if they won, it means that everything was wrong in the first place. You're Carrie Lakes of the world. You're insane people who say that by exposing corruption, quote unquote, I actually won, while doing nothing helpful and only grifting for themselves. And until we get in a situation where these people no longer can have influence and power, we're just going to be stuck in the same terrible cycle. But for those of you who are still out there, keep the faith. America's a great place. We'll get through the next election cycle. We're going to keep growing. We're going to keep doing better. We're past the pandemic now. We're going to go ahead and live our lives the best way we can. And I really wish all of you nothing but the best. Take care and have a great one. Until the next time. NotoriousSA out. Thank you.